Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Chris van Schaardenburg, Head of Collections at the Tank Museum, and welcome to our second episode of the Tank Workshop Diaries. Thank you very much for your interest and enthusiasm in last month's Tank Workshop Diaries, which was a new series for us, but it appears to be very popular, so thank you for that. Last month you would have seen the Churchill Mark III in the workshop. There's quite a bit of an update there from my colleagues in the workshop. They're working hard on the track change, which is quite a lot of work, and there's some quite a good progress as well on the engine, but the guys in the workshop will tell you a lot more about it. Since our last workshop diaries, we also had the M60 in the workshop, and we had our friends from the National Military Museum in Vienna in Austria to come and help us, because they all served on this vehicle, this type of vehicle. So the Heeresgeschichtliches Museum, here you see the link. Please visit them. It's a fantastic museum, but we're very grateful for their support. We were trying to fix the engine. We had a spare engine, and they were looking at it with us to see if we could salvage that engine make it a running vehicle, because the original engine had developed a fault. Now it turns out this spare engine cannot be rescued. However, they believe, and we believe, we can actually repair the original engine, and they have offered us some spares to do this job and some specialist tooling. So we're very, very grateful, and we're very pleased that we can actually try to repair something in-house, actually the original engine that came out of the vehicle. But again, my colleagues in the workshop will tell you a lot more about it. Now, also new in the workshop is a Buffel, a South African anti-mine vehicle, which is based on a Mercedes Unimog chassis. It's coming in for a service. It had a failed power steering pump, but again, the guys will give you an update on that. This vehicle is being prepared for the season, Tanks in Action displays and possibly Tankfest. And next to the Buffel, we have the tracked Rapier, the surface-to-air missile carrier. What is nice about a tracked Rapier is exactly the same technology as our M5 freight vehicle-rise vehicles, so we're very familiar with it. Same engine, same gearbox. So just coming in for a service, a check over, and possibly some driver training once it's done. But again, ready for Tanks in Action and possibly for Tankfest. You may be wondering why I'm not in the workshop but standing in the museum in front of the Jagdpanther, and that all has to do with that engine. So let's have a look at the back, and I'll show you more why we're talking about the Jagdpanther. So here, being next to the Jagdpanther, what is very nice about this project, all the projects we've talked about so far is about running vehicles. So restoration, maintenance of vehicles we operate in the arena for Tankfest, Tiger Day, or the Tanks in Action displays. What is really nice about this one, as a museum, we're very keen to develop our conservation skills as well of the static collection. This vehicle is very complete, the Jagdpanther, but it had spent a long time outside before it finally came into the museum years ago. So there's quite a bit of corrosion, especially on the engine, the back end. That's why we have removed the engine. So let's have a closer look at the engine bay. So here we are on the back of the Jagdpanther, looking at the now empty engine bay. Mike Hayton, who looks after our Tiger 131, has carefully removed the engine with his band of volunteers.
It's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, so I see.
Everything's the same colour.
They spent quite a few weeks just preparing it, putting a lot of oil on the nuts and bolts to be able to remove them as they should come off rather than cut things free, and he managed to remove the engine without breaking anything, which is quite an achievement considering the amount of corrosion you can see here as well. Even though the vehicle has been on display for many years now inside the museum, before it actually came on display it spent many years outside, and you can see the results of that. Look at these fan drives for the cooling fans. Even though they've bizarrely enough still spin, they're badly corroded. The engine bay, you can see the corrosion, you can see the torsion bars down there. Everything is there. The vehicle is very, very complete, but it's just badly corroded from sitting in the rain for many years. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean this carefully and stabilize it, sort of museum conservation work. We're not going to strip the entire engine, we're just going to clean it, preserve it, sort of mothball the engine, but we're going to remove one or two components to copy them as reference, because for a spare engine that we're building a spare Maybach 230 for an exciting new project, which we'll tell you more about in a future episode.
Now that we've cleared the fuel problem on the Sherman Fury, it's now time to work on our next tank that's on the list. In this case, it's the M60, very successful tank. Unfortunately, quite a few problems with ours. In order to get this one up and running again, we're seeking advice from some friends that come from the National Military Museum in Vienna. And one of the biggest issues with this tank is the pack. There are various problems with this pack, including a compression issue, some brake problems, and a generator issue that all need to be sorted out. Now, like the Leopard pack, this power pack consists of the transmission and the main engine and the cooling fans, and it's all in one unit. Indeed, even the transmission and the engine oil coolers are all part of this one 8,500 pound lump that you see in front of you. A couple of other things I want to point out as we go around. Down under here we have some guides, one in the centre and one on the end here, and we'll explain the significance of those in a minute when we go into the power pack. Final drive quick release couplings, the same sort of idea as you've been shown on the Leopard. And over here then we have the various bell cranks for the braking system, engine mount here, another guide roller, and quick release final drive. All of this lump here then has to go into a corresponding hole within the tank, and it's over here. We're now looking into the rear part of the hull. This is where the transmission would normally be, and a couple of things I want to point out to you. Up here we've got the quick release coupling where it goes through to the final drive. Back here we've got one of the engine mounts. And this slide affair here is where the rollers engage when the packs goes in. They go in here, and as the packs drop down, it guides it not only down but forward, so that the pack sits in exactly the right spot. As you can imagine, although it's quite cavernous now, when we start putting that big lump in there, there's not enough room really, and we need to make sure that it goes down smack on. If we take a look now at the front of the engine bay, left and right of me then, we have the fuel tanks, just under 400 gallons of fuel in these. Just below here we see the torsion bars running through. You can see how the fuel tanks are shaped to accommodate the pack when it comes in place. And all around me we see the quick release couplings for electric, fire suppression, and other controls. And down in the centre there we have the centre guides that we pointed out earlier. These work in concert with the two rear guides as we're dropping the pack in to not only make sure that it comes down, but it goes forward and in position perfectly, so that then we can then hook all of this up. On the back of the visit from our colleagues and from the Austrian Museum, we've decided to reassess how we're going to get the M60 back on the road. The pack that you saw going into the back of the M60 is sadly, it's not beyond economical repair, essentially. But we do have the original one here that we can, with a bit of work, try and get back on the road. And as you can see, it's a power pack, which includes a transmission, but the only thing we need to work on is all of it from this bit forward here. So I've got to separate the engine and transmission, the white bit at the back here. The whole thing together weighs about 8,500 pounds, so it's quite a lump. And the plan is, I'll take away the transmission. The engine will then get put onto a special stand that our Austrian friends are going to provide for us. And they're going to send some special tools that we require in order to strip and assess this engine and hopefully get it back on the road. Just to give you an update on the Churchill, then we can see the engine, it's on its test stand. We've run this engine now in order to find out any problems that were with it and spent about 100 hours so far working on the problems that we discovered. It's so much different putting an engine into a Churchill than it is putting it into an M60 or a Leopard. This takes days to do it properly. So the last thing we want is to put it in and then discover that we've got loads of oil problems and we've got to take it out again. Just some things that we're checking out at the moment. The tacho generator for the rev counter, we want to make sure that's working. So what we've done is we've added the rev counter from inside the driver's compartment. Gives us the opportunity when the engine runs next time to check both the rev counter and the tacho gen. Then if we put the engine in and connect it all up, we know there's something wrong with the wires in between them and not the units themselves. We've got oil problems from the camshaft end caps here. Some of the unions from the oil pressure switch and from the crankshaft as well that we're sorting out. Also, it gives us an opportunity to check and work on the starter motor, which is way down the bottom there. And then once we've got all this back together, we'll put the flywheel back on and torque it up and rerun the engine again. Just to give you an overview then of the top of the engine while we're up here, we've got generator. Here we've got the air inlet tubing that comes from the air filters, distributors, and 4 carburetors for the 4 banks of pistons. We've also got some pipework here that we've done some work on, which is the Kai gas. This is the means by which we prime the inlet manifolds when the engine's cold prior to starting. Had quite a few leaks in here. These are the exhaust manifolds, which get extremely hot, particularly with a 2-stroke engine, and we don't want their chance of any neat petrol getting anywhere near those. So we've spent quite a lot of time working on those. Another interesting feature, the carburetors on these Churchill engines were updated through service. So there were various changes to the jets and to the emulsion tubes inside. So what we've done is we've stripped all 4 of these carbs and made sure that both the jets and all the other associated pipework inside there is all to the same modification, which hopefully will enable the engine to run an awful lot smoother.
Here we have the Buffalo. Now, as you can see, it's a slightly unusual vehicle to have in a tank collection. The reason we have it, it's an armoured vehicle. It's specifically a mine protection vehicle, and these vehicles were designed, as the name suggests, to protect the vehicles or the occupants against mines. Now, this was the first truly effective, and I emphasise the word effective, vehicle of its class. There were vehicles before it, such as the Bosvark. The Bosvark was basically a unimog. It offered very little protection to the driver. In fact, the driver had no armour protection at all. That was developed in 1974. Now, in 1978, the South Africans took the remarkable off-road vehicle, the Mercedes Unimog. They used the chassis, the wheels, the gearbox and the engine. And the South Africans took the Unimog and made an armoured body and an armoured cab for the driver. Now, mine protection vehicle, it must be remembered these vehicles were made specifically to protect the occupants. Now, if a vehicle hit a mine or an IED, an improvised explosive device, the vehicle could be written off. So it was made with commercial parts generally. They weren't concerned about the survivability of the vehicle. What was important were the people inside and the driver. Here you see the driver having an armoured cab. You have to be very small to get in here, by the way. It's very basic. You'll note there's no overhead protection in this vehicle at all. A canvas cover could be erected if it was raining, purely for comfort. The driver has no overhead protection. But he is completely safe. Now, without getting technical, the way a mine protection vehicle works, if a landmine or an IED detonates under the vehicle, these sides would send the blast shockwave out to the side. So the people inside are pretty protected. Again, it was the first effective under trials and tested, and it works very well. Not very good if you're stood beside the vehicle when an IED goes off, because obviously it's coming towards you. But the occupants and the driver were pretty safe. Now, there's some common misconceptions about this vehicle. The first, on the floor in the vehicle, there's a 200-litre diesel tank and a 100-litre water tank. Now, although some of the troops may have taken comfort in the fact that it did absorb some of the energy of an IED or a mine, It's not actually the case. These vehicles were made to operate in very hostile environments. As such, it needed long range and drinking water. And basically, the water tank is a drinking water. You fill this here, 100 litres of drinking water. Also on this side, diesel filler cap, 200 litres. Those 200 litres of diesel would give this vehicle a 600-mile operational range before requiring to fill up. Now, what is not often referred to, although the troops believe they get protection in the event of an IED with the tanks underneath them, what was the case was they filled the tyres with water, and that would absorb some of the blast. So that was a good thing. It did add weight to already a 6.15 tonne vehicle, but it was very effective. So again, hits an IED, vehicle's written off, the crew survive, and that's what it's all about. It's one of the vehicles we run at Tankfest annually because it is an armoured vehicle, and it is the first effective MPV. The problem here had no steering. It had steering, but it didn't have any power-assisted steering. So you can imagine with these wheels and a 6-tonne vehicle, power steering is essential. What we did, we brought it in, we had to dismantle the front. I'm reliably informed this is the radiator. Strip down the front end, get to the power steering pump. We took the pump apart and we found that the pressure valve is fitted with a circlip, and the circlip had broken, so the pressure valve wasn't actually doing its job. So we are hoping, we've now replaced the circlip, reassembled it. We need to reassemble the front end, and we are hoping that that will be the problem. Again, when you're fixing a vehicle, you deal with what you know and what you find, and then you move on to the next problem. So all in all, quite an interesting vehicle. Mercedes engine, gearbox, running gear and chassis. Very ugly, depending on if you like it. I think it's personally ugly, but it is certainly a unique vehicle.
In concert with the engine testing, we're also going to take the tracks off this vehicle. If you look here, you can see some of the shot damage from projectiles. Now, it's quite possible that when these have been hit by rounds fired from other armoured vehicles, the actual shock of that round passing through that link has contributed to the fact that the pin is broken. So if you see now the end of this track pin, it shouldn't be moving like that. That suggests that there's a break in the pin. And you can see how this broken part is moving in and out and both side to side. If that was a single track pin that was whole all the way through, it just wouldn't do that. And you can see we've marked this from the track inspection with the silver paint. We have spare track, so I'd much rather put one on that hasn't been subject to that shock than leave this one on. The process of doing that hasn't really changed right from the first tanks to the modern ones that we have today. Essentially, we strip the track at the back of the tank, we pull the tank forward and allow the track to roll out naturally in front of it, and then we connect the new track to the old track, pull the tank fully forward, disconnect the two, and then roll that old one up, and then reconnect the new track and pull it back into the workshop. Back here, this is the problem. Because you can see the outside's moving around the track, but the track pin itself isn't moving. Right, hit it again. And go on then.
That's the part now, I reckon the track's broke. Yeah, it's gone. Well, Buzz, watch yourself, because this will come back at you. There you go. Right. Okay.
And that's what constitutes a good track. Okay. About the same now. Keep going. Keep going. Right, we're halfway through the process now. You can see the track laid out on the floor, the exposed TA wheels here, and the exposed track rails on the side there with all the mud and stuff underneath. It's taken slightly longer than we'd expected. We had real problems getting these track pins out. They're held in the end by small bits of metal, one of the ones here, and they're welded, so we have to grind those off before we can even attempt to drive the pin. And then some of the pins are broken. So the outside's okay, but the inside bit is stuck in the middle of the track in this section here. So we've had to sort of experiment with a few different links in order to get the track apart. We want to get the track apart at roughly the same point because ideally we want the same length of track to go in out the front. And as I said, this has taken a wee bit longer than we'd expected. We've had to utilise the crane as a bit of a brake as we roll this one off the front. As you can imagine, you don't want this to gain momentum and just go crash through the hangar doors. And you can see now, ideally we'd like this track to lay back, a new track would lay back on itself when we dropped it down, but you can see from this angle here the amount of wear. To be honest, it's probably a combination of the wear and a broken pin somewhere up there. So if you look down here, you see this is the normal profile, and you see this one's bent over and it gradually gets worse. At the very least, we would have replaced those. Down in here is one of the many broken pins. There's a break there, which has caused this to side shift as the tank runs and increase the wear on the track links themselves. Slight damage underneath here. But you'd expect some of that on the bottom side. Again, it's an old track, so it's going to be worn. You have to accept that. But if we've got better track that we can use with less broken pins, then the obvious thing to do is to change it, and that's exactly why we're doing this job. Like a big elephant, isn't it? Sticky bun.
For those of you who are familiar with artillery systems, this is a Rapier missile system, and this is an armoured vehicle. In 1978, the Shah of Iran had an order for chieftain tanks, and he requested something to protect the chieftains on the move. Now, before this, the Rapier missile system was a trailer vehicle. There were a number of disadvantages with a trailer carried vehicle, but they wanted something more mobile. So what they did, they tallied up the Rapier missile system with an M548 vehicle. This became known as a tracked Rapier. Now there's no identification of the vehicles, i.e. Chieftain is a FE4201. This is just a tracked Rapier. And I'm not going to pretend to you I know what these things all do. These are obviously missiles. Now one advantage of a tracked Rapier, it could carry 8 missiles. The trailered Rapier could only carry 4. Another advantage to the track system was from identifying a target to firing was a time delay of 30 seconds on the tracked Rapier. Now the trailer system, from sighting a target to actually firing was 15 minutes. That's quite inconvenient if you have a squadron of MiG-21s coming at you. 30 seconds great, 15 minutes no good at all. Now, so what we have is the missile system, the vehicle itself, and generators for running the vehicle. Now, If you look inside, this has more buttons than the Space Shuttle, believe me, and I have absolutely, really no idea what everything does. What I do know is we shouldn't turn the radar on because planes can tell when radar is locked onto it and it makes people very nervous. However, the vehicle came in for an annual inspection. This is the vehicle we use at Tankfest. Again, why is it in our collection? Well, it's an armoured vehicle and it has association with Chieftain main battle tanks. That's why it was developed. So, rather than me tell you what we've been doing to this vehicle, I'm going to hand you over to Roy, who's actually been carrying out the service and inspection.
One of the first things we did, we had to remove the tracks, raise the vehicle up so that we can check the road wheels for rim rock. Rim rock is where the bearings have got loose, so we needed to tighten those back up and then grease it all back, and then replace the tracks and put it back on the ground. A major part of the servicing is the main engine, which is buried deep inside the crew cabin. The engine lives inside the driver's cab. It's a very difficult engine to get to because you only have the access panel here. We dropped the engine oils, we checked the filters to make sure that they were okay. It does cause a lot of problems though, because if you want to get to the engine properly, you'd have to take the cab off.
So thank you again for watching this Tank Workshop Diaries episode, and I hope you find it as interesting as the previous one. And just to let you know, we do read all your comments, we find it very entertaining, and we do also try to answer your questions where possible. For example, last time on the Leopard 1, Mark made a genuine mistake on pointing out something on the engine which he knew it wasn't, so he had to pay everyone a drink afterwards. But if you have questions, please just post them in your Facebook comments. And if you're really interested to get more involved in the Tank Museum, please sign up to our YouTube channel. It's not just Tank Workshop Diaries, but many other videos that highlight what we do here at the Tank Museum. In addition to that, you can also become a member of our patron scheme, and funding to that goes directly to projects like in the workshop, the running collection maintenance, but also some of the conservation work like on the Jagdpanther. So thank you and see you next time.